of Ezekiel. Linda pointed out to me that even though I gave you some readings from Ezekiel early, it was still kind of late last night. So some of you were probably already in bed by the time you got the readings. So I'm sorry about that. But and if you didn't, in all of our classes, if you don't get the readings done beforehand, that's okay. We understand, and I know that it can be challenging, and there's not that's not a prerequisite for attending the class, just so you know. So just jump right in with us, no matter whether you've read the chapters or some of the chapters or not. So we're in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is, of course, one of the longest books in the Bible, and yes, thank you, the Bible, and so obviously we're going to have a pretty tough time doing much with Ezekiel in one day. We probably won't even get to all the readings. I'm going to probably jump around a little bit, but I want you just to, again, as we've done with most of these prophets, I want you just to sort of see an overview and how Ezekiel fits in with the other prophets that we've looked at, and with Israelite history and with world history. And so just to start, Ezekiel begins with a date. And if you look at chapter 1, verse 1, you'll see it. And begins, in my 30th year, it's the NIV's interpretation, but it's a pretty good one. In my 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were opened, and I saw a vision of God. Visions of God. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kibar River in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was on it. So right away, we have sort of something interesting about Ezekiel. What is it? Where is he when he receives his prophecy?
He's in captivity.
He's already in Babylon, right? So that's kind of interesting. We haven't really seen that yet with the other prophets. Jeremiah was part of the exile, but Ezekiel, at least if this is his first call to prophecy, as it seems to be, it occurs in Babylon, in the land of the by the river, actually just sort of a canal dug, an artificial canal dug off, I think, the Euphrates. And the date is the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, which doesn't help you right away, but it does help you if you do a little bit of digging, a little bit of research, and it gives you a date of about 591 BC. So about 591 is when this prophecy talked about in chapter 1 occurs. There were several stages of the exile. There was an exile in 605, I believe it was. The first wave was taken by Babylon from Jerusalem into captivity. And then there were two others, about 597 and about 586, somewhere in there. So Ezekiel was one of either of the first two waves, it seems, that was taken into captivity, went away into captivity into the land of Babylon. We also see that Ezekiel comes from a priestly family. Now, there's not much of a place to be a priest for Ezekiel at this point in time, but he is part of a priestly family, the son of somebody named, I like to think it was pronounced Buzzy, but it was probably Buzi. But you can call him Buzzy if you like. So this is sort of sets up for us when Ezekiel prophesied what his first. So about 592, 593, 591, somewhere in there, to about 571. There are other prophecies that are dated that get us to about 571. So about 20 years was the length of his his prophecies, at least the ones described here in this book. As I said, one of the longer books in the Bible. The first, broadly, the book breaks down. You can break it down into sections, or you can break it down into visions. And if you break it down into sections, it breaks down into about three. There are prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem in the first 24 chapters. That's mainly what it's made up of. There's some stuff in there, but mainly it's made up of prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem. Then chapters 25 through 32, a shorter section, you have prophecies against other nations outside of Israel and outside of Judah and Jerusalem, similar to what we saw with Obadiah, for instance. And then we have the last 15 or so chapters, we have prophecies of salvation and redemption and hope. There are promises, and there's a new sort of glimmer of hope on the horizon. And often, largely, it is described in terms of a new temple. And Ezekiel, being the son of a priest, I suppose, his prophecies sort of revolve around the temple. God leaving the temple, God coming back to the temple. That's kind of literally the beginning and end of Ezekiel. One chapter we're gonna look at chapters 4 and 5. You can turn there if you want to. Chapters 4 and 5 begin with God vacating the temple. And then as we get to the end of Ezekiel, chapter 43, you see God coming back to a rebuilt temple. The glory of God leaving and the glory of God returning. And that sort of bookends these prophecies. So it's kind of obvious, the symbolism is kind of clear, the intention is kind of clear in that, and it doesn't take a whole lot of explanation. So let's go to chapter 4, unless there are comments on any of that or questions. Ezekiel had some interesting stuff that he was asked to do. Some of the prophets have this sort of acted parables. Instead of telling a story like Jesus did, some of the prophets do some sort of strange things that attract attention and make people ask, what in the world is going on? What does this mean? And one of the oddest is in chapter 4 of Ezekiel. Ezekiel also, you'll notice, is called Son of Man a lot. Jesus, of course, adopted that term for himself. Ezekiel doesn't mean it in the same way. Son of Man is a poetic Hebrew way of saying human, mortal. God is calling him a mortal as he addresses him in some of these prophecies. So verse 1 of chapter 4, now, Son of Man, take a block of clay, put it in front of you, and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. Then lay siege to it. Erect siege works against it. Build a ramp up to it. Set up camps against it and put battering rams around it. It's like like you might lay out a battle diagram on a table, right? It's this sort of he's supposed to act out this. I wonder if he made like explosion sounds as his soldiers fought. I don't know, but I mean, it's a very sort of vivid picture, right? He's demonstrating this, what's going to happen. Now, remember, there's been 2 exiles from Jerusalem, but there hasn't been the third one yet, which is the big kahuna of exiles, in which the walls are broken down, the temple is destroyed, people starve to death. It's an awful situation. And so he's still talking about what's about to happen. He shows as a sign, he acts out this siege of Jerusalem. Verse 4, then lie on your left side and put the sin of the people of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I've assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the people of Israel. After you finish this, lie down again, this time on your right side. and bear the sin of the people of Judah. I've assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and with bared arm prophesy against her. I'll tie you up with ropes so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have finished the days of your siege. Sound like fun?
No.
Want to be a prophet? I don't know if it meant he literally had to lay there for 400 and something days.
How could that even be possible?
Yeah, I hope he was able to get up and, take a break now and then, maybe just assign times during the day when he had to do this. But in any case, it doesn't sound much fun, and it's not going to get much more fun. Verse 9, then, take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt. I don't know what some of those are. I don't like some of them, so this is rough. Put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. You're to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day and eat it at set times. Also measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. It's not a lot. About 8 ounces of food, about 1.5 pints of water, I think. So it's not a lot of food that he's to be eating each day. Yeah. And that's sort of the point. Eat the foods as you would a loaf of barley bread, bake it in the sight of the people using, yes, it says this, human excrement for fuel. This is how you're to bake your bread, he says. God says, in this way, the people of Israel will eat defiled food among the nations where I'll drive them. Now, Ezekiel, he's apparently willing to go along with this until he gets to this point, and then he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I've not eaten defiled food ever. Sounds like Peter in Acts chapter 10. Very well, he said, God makes a gracious concession. I will let you bake your bread over cow dung instead of human excrement. So the far-reaching grace of God, and that's so God allows him to use cow stuff instead of human to cook this food. And he says, I'm about to cut off the food supply in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair, for food and water will be scarce. They'll be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. So it's a vision, right, of what's going to occur: the starvation, the hunger, the desperation, and the eventual eating of defiled food, because that's all they're going to have. That's the only option they're going to have to save themselves.
This is typical of food eaten when people are under siege.
Yeah.
They gotta
I mean,
bare rations for survival.
absolutely. Just
And this is not an appetizing meal at all.
No.
It's just for survival.
Not very well rounded, is it?
We wouldn't want it.
Not to mention how it's prepared, right?
The food we have today, man, if I make us sick.
So it's an acted parable. It's a demonstration of God's of the coming judgment against Judah and Jerusalem. Comments or thoughts about chapter 4?
So, getting down with the number of years.
Yeah. 40 makes you think of the wandering in the wilderness. 40 years of there, 40 years after the fall, that doesn't fit. 390 maybe is an approximation of the number of years between David's reign, perhaps Solomon's, or a number of years of the divided kingdom. That seems a little much for the divided kingdom. People kind of have a hard time sort of pinning that down exactly, but God seems to have something in mind, right? And it has to do with the days that Ezekiel lays there are representative of the years that Israel has been resistant to God and disobedient to God, and is supposed to, I think, be very demonstrative of of why God is doing this. I mean, this has not been something new, right? This is not something that has just come up. This is a deep-seated disobedience to the covenant that he is just now in his grace punishing.
In effect, he's living out some spiritual realities,
Mm-hmm.
bad ones. And it seems unfair that he's got to bring up one of all this.
That's kind of what being a prophet is, though, isn't it? That, I mean, you sort of have to,
A bad end of it.
you do. It's not, whether it's persecution or whether it's stuff like this, being a prophet is not for the faint of heart. And so, yeah, it's tough. Chapter 9, let's jump to chapter 9. Chapter 5 is another sort of similar acted parable in which Ezekiel basically shaves his hair and beard and as a demonstration of the judgment that's coming. But chapter 9, then I heard him call out in a loud voice, bring those who are appointed to execute judgment on the city, each with a weapon in his hand. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. With them a man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the God of Israel went up from above the cherubim where it had been and moved to the threshold of the temple. Where were the cherubim?
The
The Ark of the Covenant. And where was the Ark of the Covenant? Temple geography.
of Holies.
What's that? In the Holy of Holies, yes, the Holy of Holies. And so, God's glory resided over the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, and now Ezekiel sees God's glory rising up and moving to the threshold of the temple. The Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had the writing kit at his side and said to him, go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. Detestable things usually is a phrase that has to do with idol worship, false gods. As I listened, he said to the others, follow him through the city and kill, without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men and women, the mothers and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. And then he said to them, defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go. So they went out and began killing throughout the city. While they were killing and I was left alone, I fell face down, crying out, alas, sovereign Lord, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel in this outpouring of your wrath on Jerusalem? He answered me, the sin of the people of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of bloodshed and the city is full of injustice. They say, the Lord has forsaken the land. The Lord does not see. So I will not look on them with pity or spare, but I'll bring down on their own heads what they have done. So there's this picture, and actually John describes a similar scene in the book of Revelation, the numbering, the mark of God on his people. And that's kind of what's happening here, right? The mark is a way of saying, don't kill this one. And so it's everybody who doesn't grieve over the failures, the covenant failures of Israel. And so the implication is there aren't many. Then verse 10, chapter 10, then I looked and I saw the likeness of a throne of lapis lazuli above the vault that was over the heads of the cherubim. This is in chapter 1. This isn't the same cherubim like over the Ark of the Covenant. These are the literal cherubim, the guardians of God's holiness. Cherubim kind of appear in a lot of ancient Near Eastern art. The Bible is not the only place they show up, but here they are sort of guardians of God. They seem to bear his chariot as Ezekiel goes on to describe, because there are wheels beneath the cherubim. Fill your hands with burning coals, verse 2 says, from among the cherubim and scatter them over the city. The burning coals sort of represent judgment, represent sort of turning Jerusalem into an altar to which and the people of Israel become the sacrifice going up to God. The cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose up from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was full of the radiance of the glory of God. The fire is taken from under the cherubim. There's a description. The wheels that they describe in verse 9 and 10, they sparkled like topaz. As for their appearance, the four of them looked alike. Each was a wheel intersecting a wheel. You know the song, maybe.
As are blue,
What's that?
as are blue. You know the song.
Ezekiel
I
saw the
can't
wheel
think
was
of
the
the
one I
whole
was
name
thinking
of
of.
it. Well, anyway, I love that song too, and I can't even think of it. But I know that's a stone. It's
What's
a
that?
stone, precious stone or something.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
the wheels, people kind of spill a lot of ink over, but it seems like the wheels probably refer to they make it sort of God is mobile, right? And he is rolling out of the city as rolling out of the temple as Ezekiel describes what's going on. He describes the cherubim, the cherubim went in whatever direction the head faced without turning as they went. Their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands, and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were their four wheels. These aren't like chubby winged babies like you see in art sometimes. These are fearsome looking creatures that
Mhm.
seem to be in God's presence. Each of them had four faces. One face was that of a cherub, the second of a human, the third of a lion, the fourth of an eagle. These were the living creatures I'd seen by the Kibar River. That's chapter 1. Verse 18, then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. While I watched, the cherubim spread their wings and rose from the ground, and as they went, the wheels went with them. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. Again, God leaving his temple and leaving the city of Jerusalem and giving it over to judgment. If you look at verse, there's more as in chapter 11. There's depictions of judgment. There's also, though, a little bit the first sort of glimmer of hope. Verse 17, I'll gather you from the nations. This is 11:17. I'll gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you've been scattered, and I'll give you back the land of Israel again. Verse 19, I'll give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. I'll remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Then they'll follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. That sounds very similar to Jeremiah's new covenant promise, and probably refers to the same thing. Verse 22, then the cherubim with the wheels beside them spread their wings, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. The glory of the Lord went up from within the city and stopped above the mountain east of it. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the exiles in Babylonia and the vision given by the Spirit of God. Then the vision I had seen went up from me, and I told the exiles everything the Lord had shown me. So again, God leaving the temple. What else? Other comments or questions or thoughts?
I believe the vision is demonstrating God is certainly, yes, mobile, and he is sovereign over all his creation.
Yeah.
You know, the sovereign Lord is not just there in the temple, he's there with Ezekiel in the exiles as well.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that, right? God called the prophet in Babylon when his people were already going into captivity and already, and seems like already a done deal that they're going, right? And the city's going to fall. There's going to be this sorrow and this judgment, but Ezekiel is telling the exiles what he's seeing, right? There's some glimmer of hope in even buried in all of that.
The mark that is on the people's heads, whether it's literal or it's symbolic, but it's not the same Hebrew word as the mark or Cain.
No,
It's a different Hebrew word.
yeah, that's a good point. Let's go to 18 just briefly. Chapter 18 is kind of interesting, and I think important to the themes, some of the themes of Ezekiel, because one of the things that's happening here, right, is the people are going into exile. God has invoked the fact that it's been 390 years. It's been, 400 years of covenant breaking. And so you kind of see why the people might have had this proverb going around in Israel. The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Now, what does that mean?
We're paying for the sins of our
We're
fathers.
paying for the sins of our fathers. That's exactly sort of the thinking behind this proverb, right? What's happening is we're paying for the sins of our fathers. And in some ways, that's a way to sort of remove responsibility from yourself, right? Well, that was before. We do that now sometimes, right? We think about, well, we're not like the previous generations in this way or that way. And we can kind of feel superior and kind of feel above it. So that's one thing about that. But the other thing is you're paying for sins that you didn't commit, as the thinking goes. And God is saying that's not the way it is. The one who sins is the one who will die. Everyone belongs to me, verse 4 says. The parents as well as the child, both alike belong to me. The one who sins is the one who will die. And so he gives a couple of hypothetical situations, right? The first is what's just happened here. The first is a righteous man, right? In verse 5. Suppose there's a righteous man who does what is just and right. No idolatry. He keeps the commandments, right? He's not committing idolatry. He's not defiling his neighbor's wife. No adultery. And so there's this kind of sense that he's okay. He doesn't oppress anyone, returns what he took and pledged for a loan, does not commit robbery, et cetera, does not lend to the poor or the hungry at interest or take a profit from them. He follows my decrees. That man is righteous, he'll surely live. And then suppose he has a violent son who does all the things that his father didn't do, right? Suppose this righteous man has this violent son. He's to be put to death. His blood will be on his own head. But suppose this son has a son who sees all the sins that his father commits, and though he sees them, he does no such thing. And so he doesn't do all these things. And he, predictably, because he follows my commands, he'll survive. He'll live. So you get the point, right? And this is an important theme in Ezekiel, that we're responsible for our own sins. We're not responsible for our fathers. We're not responsible for our children, other than treating them, trying to teach them correctly. But we are responsible for ourselves, and you can even extend it, right? We're not responsible for our neighbors, our churches, their sin is theirs and our sin is ours. And that seems for us probably to be sort of a no-brainer, but for people going through this difficult, catastrophic kind of situation, you can see the problems with that, and you can also see the hope in it. So whatever our fathers may have done, if we choose to be different, we'll live. God will see that, and God will count us righteous. So there's the hope in it. You can change things. You can change the trends. You can change the pendulum swing. And so it gives us a sense of possibility and a sense of hope.
There's a story it came to my mind on Sunday. I think I got it off the 700 Club. Basically, this mobster's son, or mob boss's son, he met a woman, met her, and she's a dancer, she's a Christian. She explained she was a Christian. And I think she talked to him about Christ. He later, I don't know when, but he did wind up in prison with his dad. Some prison guard gave him a Bible, and he turned his life over to Christ. But his dad was still, in prison, mob boss still sneering at him about his decision to follow Christ and leave, the path of organized crime.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's Ezekiel, right? That's the righteous son who chooses to go a different way, and who is
also it's a monkey wrench in the idea of original sin, that we inherit Adam's sin. Well, we do these things because of Adam. Adam made me do it.
right. Yeah, I mean, it reminds us again, I think, of the fact that we can change situations. Families can, get caught up in dysfunction. You can make a change. You can do something differently. You can choose a different path. And it doesn't take away the fact that trauma is real, and people respond to trauma, and sometimes traumatize others in doing so. But you can make the decision, you can make the choice, and God gives grace, and God allows for new starts and new beginnings. Other thoughts, comments? Let's go to chapter 36 and look at another pretty familiar passage. Probably, if you know Ezekiel, you might know some of this one. 36, starting in verse 16. God talks about Israel had profaned him and profaned the covenant, and so God punishes them partially because, verse 23, so that the nations will know that I am the Lord, when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. It's kind of interesting. If Israel won't show that God is holy by living in a holy way, they will certainly show that God is holy by the punishment that they receive, because he will not tolerate and will not continue in covenant with them in their unholiness. And so the nations are going to see it one way or the other. They're going to see it through Israel as God intended, through them keeping the covenant, or they're going to see it in their failure to keep the covenant and God's punishment. Either way, the nations are going to see God's holiness. But then in verse 24, I will take you out of the nations. I'll gather you from all the countries and bring you back to your own land. I'll sprinkle clean water on you and you'll be clean. I'll cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. Again, it's the heart of stone, removed in the heart of flesh instead. I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Then you'll live in the land that I gave your ancestors. And you'll be my people and I'll be your God, that covenant language. He promises to resettle them. Once again, I'll yield to Israel's plea, verse 37, and do this for them. I'll make their people as numerous as sheep, as numerous as the flocks for offerings at Jerusalem during our appointed festivals. So will the ruined cities be filled with flocks of people. Then they will know that I am the Lord. And then you have chapter 37, which is another famous song, Dry Bones, right? And you have this, God brings Ezekiel out by the Spirit of the Lord and sets me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them. I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. And he asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. That's a good answer, right? When God asks you a question, usually a good answer just to say, I'm not sure, but you know. So well, you let me know. I know this is rhetorical. You let me know. So God says, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. It's kind of funny, isn't it? Prophesying to a bunch of bones. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I'll make breath enter you, and you'll come to life. I'll attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I'll put breath in you and you'll come to life. Then you'll know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound. And the bones came together, bone to bone. I've read this a lot in the past, and I've always thought it must have been kind of a horrifying sight, honestly, to sort of see all these bones coming together and oh wow. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. Breath and wind, spirit, all the same Hebrew word, ruach, as in Greek too. Sort of does double duty or even triple duty in this vision.
So it reflects the Jewish tradition where the bones are in a box and preserved.
Yeah.
It's a little more realistic.
Yeah.
For those of that tradition.
Yeah. So I prophesied as he commanded me, verse 10, breath entered them. They came to life and stood on their feet, a vast army. And in case you missed the point, God is going to drive it home, right? Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We're cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I'll bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I'll put my spirit in you and you'll live, and I'll settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and I've done it, declares the Lord. Bring you up from your graves, right? That's where Israel was. Israel was gone. Israel was dead. There was no hope. It was over. How many people had been taken into captivity by the Babylonians and then were allowed to go back to their land and allowed to ever had a nation again? There may have been others, but not many. Most of the time, it was just that was the end of it. And Israel, God promises that He's going to raise them up out of their graves. As Christians, of course, we can't help but thinking about Jesus' resurrection and our own as we read these. And also, I think just the hope that God leaves in us, that even when things seem empty and dry and hopeless, there's still hope where there's God and where there's God's Spirit.
Kind of reminds you of the creation too, right?
Yeah.
where God breathed
Mhm.
life into.
Yeah, I think it echoes,
And
yeah, I think it intentionally,
reflects that.
yeah, probably echoes creation language. Because it's a new creation, it's a new start. And ironically, it can't happen until there's death, right? It can't happen until everything else is put to death. I wonder if Paul had any of that kind of stuff in mind when he talked about putting to death the old person so that the new can be energized by God's Spirit and raised to a new life. Paul was a good Jew. I can't imagine he didn't think a little bit of Ezekiel when he wrote that. Other thoughts? All right, let's go to chapter 43 then. This is just sort of the reversal. As we saw God's glory leaving the temple, chapter 1 of verse 43, then the man brought me to the gate facing east to east. We've seen before this, and chapters before this, a man with a measuring rod who is basically sort of the architect of God's new temple and laying out the way it's going to look and the way the rebuilt temple and temple area is going to look. And then chapter 43, verse 1. Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I'd seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. While the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. He said, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I'll live among the Israelites forever. The people of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost beside my doorposts, with only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name by their detestable practices. So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I'll live among them forever. Prostitution in Ezekiel refers to idolatry. Ezekiel picturing Israel as the unfaithful wife. There's some pretty explicit references to Israel's prostitution in verse 16. I think, Michael, didn't you ask? I think you asked me Sunday, joking.
Yeah, I asked you if we're going to cover it, man. Chapter 16.
I decided, no, I don't think we're going to do 16. But you can go back and look at it if you want to, but it's not for the faint of heart. But it describes the prostitution of Israel and their unfaithfulness to God by running after other gods and other nations. Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel that they may be ashamed of their sins. So that this perfect temple is described so that the people can consider its perfection, and if they're ashamed of all they've done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exits and entrances, its whole design, and all its regulations and laws. Write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations. This is the law of the temple. All the surrounding area on top of the mountain will be most holy. Such is the law of the temple. So this picture of this renewed temple is not just, we kind of read it and go, well, that's kind of interesting, and then sort of skip over it. But for Ezekiel and for the people of Israel, it's supposed to be a call to holiness and to perfection themselves. They are supposed to aspire to be the people who deserve this beautiful, perfect temple with God and his glory living in it.
It hasn't happened yet.
No. And I,
For it, I guess.
and yeah,
Utopia.
but it's this is what's out there. This is the vision, right? that's laid out for God's people. And for us too, as Christians, we read this and I think it ought to help us aspire to be the people among whom God can live, you know, the people among whom God's presence can dwell. Well, let's look at comments or questions about
It's
that.
interesting that still today, conflict that's going on here in Palestine is based on the assumption that the land still belongs to them. But they don't seem to have ever seen this as a literal picture of how things would look. Right, they never tried to build the temple, the specifications that are described here.
Right,
or
right.
accomplish the tribal allotments that are described either.
Yeah, Herod's temple and as you say, the tribal allotments that come later in Ezekiel, in chapter 48. Yeah, they didn't seem to be thought of, I guess, as prescriptive. But maybe they thought of them as exactly what we're talking about, this sort of aspirational picture of God's people and God at home with his people. Because you're right, they never do try to. Herod's temple doesn't look anything like this, for instance, or the temple built by Ezra and Nehemiah doesn't look anything like this.
I taught it to the Vietnamese senior group. I had to look. I didn't have the chance to look through my computer to find the notes, but it's missing. It's not a plan. It's not a blueprint. It's missing a lot of data. Okay, that we look at it. There's like, well, it looks like there's a lot of data there, but it's an outline of the vision. And Hebrews is very clear that the Levitical system pointed to the work of Christ,
Right, right.
and Christ fulfills that work. So yeah, I think I would agree with that. The vision is motivational and showing that God is planning to be with his people, you know, in holiness.
And the perfection of the temple, right? It's cubical. It's, you know, there's this sort of perfection in which it's, you know, it's supposed to, I think, represent something more than be literally reproduced. And I just want to point out at the end that Ezekiel ends in verse 35 of chapter 48. The name of the city from that time on will be "The Lord is there," which is a nice way for Ezekiel to end, considering all we've seen, right? the sorrow and the judgment and the grief and the pain and the destruction and all this horrible horror show kind of stuff. God leaving the temple, leaving the city, but at the end, there's this hope that Israel will be the place, Jerusalem will be the city in which you can just call it "The Lord is there." And as believers in that God, we want God to be with us as well, and we want to be the people among whom God will live and walk and be among us. Well, that's Ezekiel in a nutshell. There's a lot more, of course.
It's not like Revelation, but apocryphal language in there.
John-
We could ever understand it all.
John either uses the same language or liberally borrows from Ezekiel. I don't know which, but I mean, it's yeah,
It has to be figurative language.
it's very similar.
That maybe they understood back then that we can't understand today.
John's picture of the river right in the tree, and Ezekiel has a similar description of Jerusalem and the temple.
And I think the tribal allotments are omitted by John. I mean, John quotes Ezekiel, but there are sections that are missing that which he quotes, like, you know, the tribal distinction and the land. Okay, that's omitted by John because it's not necessary anymore.
Right. He both was what's helpful to him. Yeah, yes.
The other possibility is that they saw pieces of the same thing.
Other thoughts or comments? Well, thanks, everybody, for your
It's good to see everybody.
what's that, Darlene?
I say it's good to see you all.
It's good to see you too. Glad to see you as well. You guys have a good week. I think we'll do
They were contemporaries, and I have a note here that says they may have even known each other.
I wasn't gonna necessarily do Daniel, but I guess I could.
It's a big book too.
Are you following the Jewish canon and putting Daniel with history and not with the
Well,
prophets?
I mean, I know he's a prophet, but I don't know. I just didn't really think of him as part of it. We've been in that. I may hold off and maybe we'll do Daniel. I don't know. If everybody wants Daniel, we'll look at Daniel too.
Just a logical choice. I mean,
I guess so. I guess there's a vote for Daniel. Maybe we'll do that.
yeah, there'll be a lot of discussion on Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel's interesting. Well, thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.